Welcome to my channel, where every story comes to life. Dive into captivating narratives that spark your imagination. Let's start today, new narrative story. David sat quietly at the end of the long mahogany table in his spacious living room, his hands resting on the cool surface. He had just come home after a particularly challenging day at the architecture firm, working late to finalize a complex design for a luxury hotel in New York. The workload wasn't bothering him as much as the suffocating feeling that had crept into his home over the past few weeks. He glanced at the time, 10:30 p.m. Emma was late again. Emma, his wife of 6 years, used to call him if she was running behind schedule. She'd text him sweet little messages throughout the day. Something as simple as, "I can't wait to see you tonight," would brighten his evening. Lately, though, her communication had become sparse, and her excuses for being late felt thin, almost rehearsed. David, usually quick to dismiss any feelings of jealousy or doubt, couldn't shake the uneasy sensation in his gut this time. He had noticed the subtle changes. How she had started dressing up more often, wearing the same perfume she'd used when they were dating. There were the frequent glances at her phone with a smile she didn't share with him. The door creaked open, and Emma walked in, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Her hair was styled, makeup flawless despite the late hour. She was wearing the green dress David had always loved, but tonight, it wasn't for him. "Hey," she said casually, dropping her keys into the dish by the door. "Work ran late. We had a last-minute project come in, and the clients were insistent on getting everything done today." David forced a smile, though his mind lingered on the lingering scent of cologne that wasn't his. "Late again, huh?" She shrugged, brushing off his comment. "Yeah, you know how it is." He wanted to press further, but something in her demeanor made him stop. David had always been a trusting person, and he wasn't about to become the paranoid, jealous husband. But this was different. There was an undeniable distance growing between them, and it wasn't just about her coming home late. It was the way she avoided his gaze, the way her touch had become less frequent, and the way she seemed to be somewhere else, even when they were together. David stood up, walking over to her. "You've been working late a lot recently." Emma froze. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she lowered her gaze, the guilt written all over her face. David felt a mixture of relief and devastation. Relief because he wasn't crazy. He hadn't imagined the distance between them. And devastation because the woman he loved, the woman he had trusted with his heart, had been unfaithful. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma sighed, sinking into the chair opposite him. "A few months," she admitted, her voice shaky. "It wasn't supposed to happen. Ryan reached out to me, and at first it was just catching up. But then you decided to throw away everything we had," David interrupted, his voice hardening. "I didn't mean to hurt you, David," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't plan any of this. It just happened." David laughed bitterly. "Things like this don't just happen, Emma. You made a choice, and now you have to live with it." The next few days were a blur for David. Emma moved out, taking only what she needed, leaving behind the life they had shared. The house felt emptier without her, the silence a constant reminder of what he had lost. But as much as it hurt, David knew he couldn't live in the shadow of her betrayal. He had to move on, rebuild his life, and find a way to heal. Emma, meanwhile, had moved in with Ryan. From what David had heard through mutual friends, their relationship had picked up right where it left off years ago. They were planning a wedding, a future that, once upon a time, David had imagined would be his. It hurt, more than he wanted to admit. But then, something unexpected happened. About a month after Emma left, David received a frantic phone call. "David, I need to talk to you." Emma's voice trembled on the other end of the line. David hesitated. He hadn't spoken to her since the day she left. He had tried to put her out of his mind, to focus on himself and his healing. But there was something in her voice that made him pause. "What is it, Emma?" he asked, his tone guarded. "It's Ryan," she said, her voice cracking. He called off the wedding." David blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. "He what?" "He called off the wedding," Emma repeated, her voice thick with emotion. He thinks we were having an affair, that I was still in love with you the whole time." David leaned back in his chair, a mixture of shock and satisfaction washing over him. "And were you?" he asked quietly. Emma didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know. I thought I loved him, but now, I don't know anymore." David shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "Well, it seems Ryan wasn't so sure either." "He dumped me, David. At the altar. In front of everyone." Emma's voice cracked, and David could hear the tears in her words. "I don't know what to do. I don't have anyone else to turn to." David felt a flicker of sympathy for her, but it was quickly snuffed out by the memory of her betrayal. The woman who had once been his world was now standing in the ruins of her own making, and as much as it pained him to see her suffer, he couldn't be the one to save her. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said, his voice cold but firm. "But you made your choice, and now you have to live with it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment David wondered if she had hung up. But then he heard her sniffle softly. "I understand," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, David, for everything." David didn't respond. He didn't need to. The conversation was over, just like their relationship. He hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over him. In the weeks that followed, David focused on healing, both emotionally and physically. He threw himself into his work, taking on more projects at the firm, and even starting to mentor younger architects. He began to reconnect with old friends, go on hikes, and rediscover the joys of life outside of his broken marriage. One afternoon, while sitting at a cafe with a colleague, David noticed a familiar figure walking by. It was Emma. She looked different, thinner, her face pale and drawn. She didn't see him, and David made no effort to call out to her. Watching her walk away, he felt no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet sense of peace. Sometimes the universe has a way of balancing things out. Emma had broken him once, but in the end, it was she who was left to pick up the pieces of her own shattered life. Ending. David's story is one of love, betrayal, and ultimately self-respect. In life, we often make choices that come back to haunt us, and Emma's decision to leave David for her ex ultimately led to her own downfall. But for David, it wasn't about revenge. It was about moving forward and finding peace within himself. Thank you for watching. What do you think about Emma's actions? Did David make the right decision by refuse?